Let's begin with a brief, very, very brief meditation that will be silent. Welcome, everybody, to San Francisco Dharma Collective, the world's finest Dharma Collective, the world's only Dharma Collective, I think, maybe. I think there's a couple now. Yeah. Here in the heart of the Mission District. So, super stoked to be here tonight, teaching this class I can't remember the name of, because the name we came up with was something like, deconstructing sensory experience and contacting non-dual awareness, something like that. But internally, we've just been calling it hacking the stack. So to me, this is hacking the stack class. So welcome to that. You guys sure this mic isn't just a little way too loud? A little way too? Awesome. So welcome to the class I don't know the name of, where we will be looking into this map of meditation experience. How many people, just raise your hand if you already listened to the podcast that describes this in detail? Oh, not that many folks. That's great. So the good news is that, I have like 2 podcasts where I talk about this topic. But here we have quite a bit more time, like more than double the amount of time to really go into the topic. So I'm super excited about that because actually there's a lot to say and to experience. Part of it will be experiential for you to just see what we're talking about here. And to begin with, the very first thing I want to say is this is just a map, right? The thing we're going to talk about, the thing we're going to work with, the thing we're going to describe and dig into and all that is a map. A map is not the territory. A map is not the real thing. A map, this particular map, is not somehow a model of reality or somehow the truth or something. This is just like a thing that I've been using for years to help me understand what's going on in my practice, what's going on in other people's practices. And the more I kept denying that I was using a map because I'm just kind of characterologically against maps. I think that at a deep level, your meditation practice and your spirituality is very much like your art or your love or something. It's you working with your life and your expression and your thriving. So nobody can make a map of that, and fuck anyone who tries. Is kind of my basic attitude. But as a teacher, that's not that helpful, I mean, it's a helpful attitude in one way to encourage you guys, to encourage folks to have their own experience. But in another way, when we're trying to gauge where someone's at, maybe what they're missing, maybe what's coming next, maybe something that is actually more helpful that they're missing, stuff like that, it turns out to be helpful to have an understanding of the territory. And typically the maps that are available already are not super helpful, or I found things that were really, really problematic about them and kept actually getting in the way or causing problems. And so I wasn't too happy with those. There are some, very particular maps you can refer to that are like 1,500 years old, and they're really cool in certain ways, and they do have good stuff, but they're also have their issues, and which we won't go into. That's a whole other class. But I found myself kind of taking what I could from those and throwing out the rest, which turned out to be a lot. And instead, kind of giving the model that my main Buddhist teacher, Shinzen Yang, had kind of given me about how things were working, and then expanding on that and expanding on that, and then working through actual practice with, live human beings for a long time. Like all day, every day for well over a decade, right? So really working with hundreds of people about, okay, here's what's going on. And I finally had to admit, at least to myself, that I was using at least this ballpark map to kind of understand what was going on. And then eventually I'm like, why am I hiding this? And I know why, because sprint maps are problematic, and maps introduce certain issues, right? Like striving, as soon as you show the map, everyone wants to get to the final spot on it. And just for the record, there is no final spot on this, but there is there's 4 levels, and immediately all anyone cares about is level 4. Like the minute I put it out there, that's what I started hearing, and I'm like, yep, there it is. And that's an issue, right? Like the rest of it doesn't matter somehow, and how am I going to get to level 4? And that's just like not that helpful of an attitude, That's not what we're doing in practice, hopefully, is just trying to get to the end as fast as possible. And so that's a big issue. And so this element of striving is hugely important to be on the lookout for. You have to, of course, have goals, and, just like anything else in life, you can attempt to achieve those goals. And yet, the minute you sit down on the cushion, those should be the furthest thing from your mind. Maybe the goal is helping you get to the cushion, helping you get, back to your practice every day. But once you sit down, sitting there going, okay, I'm going to try to get to level 4 right now, is, not going to work, right? And there's really solid reasons why that doesn't work. So That's a big reason to just throw maps out the window and forget about them. Another one is that many, many, many maps come with a lot of ideology built into them. They're instead of trying to just show the territory in more or less neutral manner, they're trying to create the territory. Here's the stuff you're supposed to see. And that can be cool too, right? There's something to be said for that. But most of them don't explain that very clearly. Like this, we're trying to show you a certain philosophical understanding. Instead, usually they're presented as like, here's reality. Boop. That's it. Here's reality. Go find it. And I think that that's a little problematic. And so I can sit here and complain about maps for a very long time. And I feel like I still can't believe I'm up here about to teach one. But I will do it because it turns out to be helpful. But I want to start out by saying the minute you start thinking that this is like somehow reality, stop doing that. Right? Instead, it's just showing you how to work with your practice. And it's, for the record, not showing you how to work with any practice at all. Right? It's specifically meant, especially going from 1 to 4, it's meant to work with Vipassana practice. Right? This is for mindfulness, deconstruction type practice. That's what it was designed for. And for example, if you are doing shamatha, don't do this. This is the wrong map. You want to do something like the, Bhumis or the TMI like 10 level thing where it's talking about your level of concentration, right? Specifically, it's just concentration. And, that's what that's for. This is not about your level of concentration, although to, progress down the map, you certainly are probably going to have a higher and higher level of concentration, but that's not what it's trying to show you, okay? It's more trying to do the thing that Vipassana is trying to do, which is to show you the emptiness of phenomena, to show you the no self, impermanence aspects of phenomena. Okay, so that's what it's for. Interestingly, I found out as I was working with it more, you can use it in reverse to do certain types of non-dual practice, and that's just a bonus. It's just a weird thing I found out, and I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. And we'll work with that later on in the class. But the main thing is, if you're doing Vipassana, this is going to help you get like what's going on and how to go deeper. Okay? So it's very, very, very practical. And the attempt is to have as little ideology in there as possible, although everything has some ideology in it, but just in the way it's constructed at all. But I'm much more trying to just help people meditate better with their Vipassana. Okay? So I'm going to stand up now and I'm going to draw a map and just feel my pain as I do that. And just for the record, I mean, this is Michael Taft Dharma, right? You can't find this map in a Buddhist textbook, but you can find things that are very, very similar. And of course, it's made to integrate with that very, very well. But it's not like I'm drawing a 1,000-year-old map or something. So first we'll do a nice Om in the Siddim script, not the usual Sanskrit Om, but there's a Siddim Om, just to be kind of ritualized here. And I'll put the title, which is a map of deconstructing sensory experience in Vipassana. Okay, that's really the name because it's that specific. It's not a map of meditation or a map of reality or a map of what you're supposed to see or something. It's like, if you're doing Vipassana on a sensory experience, here's how you deconstruct that, okay? So that's why it has a long name. And there's a lot of extra names I could put in there. And I'll put, part of the extra name is, and an interesting way of working with non-dual practice. Very non-standard way, but interesting nonetheless. Okay? So that's at least a beginning of a name for the map. It's probably much longer than that in Sanskrit. So level 1, here we go. Ready? Everybody ready? We'll just call it concept. It really would be conceptual or whatever, but for reasons you'll see, I have to make these nouns. Level 2. Phenomena. Or we'll say phenomenon. Level 3. Is a vibration. And good old level 4, which everyone will now take as their ultimate goal in life. Please do that immediately. Awareness. Because I don't know how to make this awareness level into an adjective. That's why these aren't vibrational, phenomenological, and conceptual. Because I don't know how to call it awareness-ol. So just to have a nice list where all the elements are the same part of language. They're all nouns. Conceptual, phenomenological, vibrational, and the awareness level. Okay? Those are the 4 levels of this map. Tonight we're really going to be focusing on these 2. Next week these 2. Because, there's a lot more to say about phenomena. So we'll do tonight these 2, next week these 2, the next week these 2, and last week we'll do the super cool, fancy reverse the stack move. Okay? So we're really zeroing in on these tonight, which I will explain now. So, this is a map of deconstructing sensory experience. So when we say that, we mean not only any sensory experience, but also things that in Western culture probably wouldn't be considered sensory experiences at all, like thinking or mental pictures or something. That's all considered sensory experience. If you see the outside world, that's a visual experience, but picturing the outside world in your mind, that's considered a mental sensory experience. Still a sensory experience in the way I'm going to talk about this. Okay, so if we take anything that happens in your senses, any sight, any sound, any smell, any taste, any touch, turns out humans have a bunch of other senses, like you're monitoring your own blood salinity level right now and stuff like that, blood sugar level also. We have all kinds of senses. Vestibular sense, stuff like that. But these big senses, we're going to talk about those kind of experiences. And also then the mental version of any of those, remembering a sight, remembering a sound, imagining a smell, imagining a taste, something like that. All of those in this way of talking, we're just going to say they're all sensory experiences. So in terms of like Buddhist theory, Vipassana theory, what is a valid sensory experience for investigation with Vipassana? Anybody? Good guess, but no. Anything. That's if it's a sensory experience, it's valid to investigate with Vipassana. So any possible thing you can experience ever, you can investigate with Vipassana, right? Except for maybe the very most bottom level of this, which there's a question about whether that's an experience at all. But getting there is part of the thing. So everybody clear about what we're talking about, which is any experience of anything ever at any time, including mental experience? That's all clear, right? That's what a sensory experience is, the way we're talking about it. Vipassana just means investigating that very clearly, right? And what Vipassana theory tells us, we're going to find that those experiences are empty, essentially. They're going to have these properties of non-self and of impermanence, and usually something like unsatisfactoriness. So this map really focuses on the no self and impermanence qualities, because those are the ones that are important for emptiness, right? Okay, so let's think of a sensory experience we could have. I'm going to just pretend for a moment that let's see here, we're looking at an apple. I like to draw apples for some reason. So we're going to do an apple. And this particular apple is something that for now we are having the sensory experience of looking at. This is only a simulation of an apple, but still close enough. Okay? Everybody with me so far? Apple. We'll even give it a shadow, because I'm in that mood tonight. Make it seem a little more 3D. Okay, so this is a thing, you're sitting there looking at an apple, right? Seeing it with your eyes. That's a sensory experience. And this apple is going to be our friend for the rest of the class, because this is going to help us to describe everything that I'm talking about. On the conceptual level, that's an apple, right? And in fact, we can just say that, we're not even concerned that it's red, it has a green stem and leaf, it's got a shadow, it's basically round, etc., etc. If we go to the highest level of the most complete abstraction, we would just kind of erase this all. Just imagine I'm doing this over the whole thing, and just write apple. Boom, big meta tag. So the fact that it's like crisp and crunches when you bite it, and it's sweet and your mouth fills with juice, and it's like got shiny red, but it's also kind of green and yellow, and it's got highlights and shadows, and the sound of the slight paper-like quality of the leaf, all that is not present at this level. Nobody cares about that. It is an apple. It's, in a way, it's a very lossless or lossful way of looking at it, right? We lose a lot of information, especially that kind of incredible sensory information, right? We're just stamping apple on there. So you can see that in a way that's very lossy, right? That's not that interesting. And it's kind of a major reduction. Brendan, can you play that Bach concerto that everyone plays in every movie? Listen to this with your eyes closed for a moment. World's most famous cello concerto. You will recognize it instantly because you've heard it in over 150 movies. absolutely, sumptuous, gorgeous piece of music that makes you actually believe that human beings can do something beautiful. But on the conceptual level, that's just music. That's all. That was music. Right? That's it. Just some music. If we put on, 50 Cent, that'd be music too. Same experience. It's music. Right? So you can see that some information gets lost there on this conceptual level. At least at the very highest, most simplistic version of it. This is what I call metatag world. Boy, for a Dharma Center blackboard, or whiteboard, that really is loud. And metatag world is where most of us are these days, right? It's a really, really common way to go through your day. You just, that's my car, there's the house, I'm just working through the world conceptually, right? And, there's this thing I want and it's called this, and there's this other thing I'm trying to get rid of and it's called that, and everything is just way up on this level of total abstraction. So something I want to make clear about this is, it sounds like I'm really normative right now, right? Like I have a lot of value judgments, but it's just the way I'm describing it to begin with. Actually, each of these levels is incredibly useful, right? And incredibly powerful, not only for what it's usually used for in the world, but we can even do meditations at each of these levels that are very worth doing. So I'm emphasizing how lossy and kind of crappy metatag world is, right? Like we're born with senses that are incredibly rich, high resolution, really great for enjoying stuff. And this is just eliminating all that, right? It's just like that doesn't even exist. But what's good about it? Anybody? Yes. If with a more complete conceptual structure, yes. What else? We have to talk about stuff conceptually. Again, that's richer than what I'm describing, but yes, something even more basic.
It just allows us to go through life, like an efficient.
It's extremely efficient, right? If I stop and like smell the petrichor of the wet earth on my way to work, and then pet a squirrel, and then like lay back and have this, that's not going to work out very well for me. I mean, I'd probably be having a good life, but it's very demanding of cerebral cortex time, right? It really causes you have to be engaged every moment with everything if you aren't doing this. But when we're doing this, we're very focused on what's important right now and what can we get done. So it has real value in the world. And you've probably noticed that this is what we're trained to do, right? For the most part, depending on your job. But even if you have a job where you're like an artist or something where you have a lot of training in this, still you have to work on this level all the time now to do your marketing and to do your budgeting and to, manage your Instagram account and all that. It's something that in the last 20 years has like mushroomed into most people most of the time are dealing with this. And when you get online and you see all the heuristics like how to bake the perfect this or how to choose that or whatever, it's really based on the efficiency of this. Right? It's just trying to what's the quickest way to make decisions in some kind of conceptual zone. So it's been really interesting as a meditation teacher and just as someone who's lived long enough to see it change, is to watch this become like such a big part of everybody's life. We're way more this way than we were even 10 years ago, but especially more than like 20 years ago. Usually the first thing anybody says about a movie these days is like sort of some kind of cultural critique. It has too many of these kind of people or not many of this kind of people or whatever, no matter which part of the political spectrum you're on, it's talking that way. Completely conceptual. Very few people, it used to be you'd start out and be like, the cinematography is gorgeous. Here's why. Really getting into that level. And we still do that, but it's interesting. This is always first. This is what matters in art now, is just, what's that? Yes, it's money. So it's been a fascinating cultural shift. Now, what can we do with that meditation-wise? In Vipassana, I'm always going to be trying to push you down the sack for the most part. And in any Vipassana class, they're at least trying to put you here. That's what they want you to make, that move out of the conceptual into the phenomenological, right? And let's see, what time is it? Quickly, what's the phenomenological? Well, that's what I was describing, the crunchiness of the apple, its redness, greenness, yellowness, and in fact that it's kind of every color. The fact that when you look at it, it's not exactly round, it's got all these interesting lumps. The sound, the paper-like rustling of its leaf, the way your mouth floods with sugars and water when you bite it, all that stuff, that's the phenomenological level, the sensory experience level, right? It's deeper into sensory experience. At that point, words almost don't matter, right? Because the proliferation of words to try to describe all that gets unwieldy. So that's the phenomenological level, and that's where Vipassana is trying to get you to go first. Eventually, they're trying to get you all go all the way down the stack. But in most Dharma centers in America, this is where everybody's trying to go. Anybody ever done the Raisin Exercise? Raise your hand if you have done the infamous Raisin Exercise. What's the Raisin Exercise? You take a single raisin and you eat it as slowly as possible while doing intense mindfulness on. You might look at it first, actually. Look at it, smell it, feel it in your hand, roll it around. Then you eat it as slowly as possible, having this kind of orgasmic experience with this raisin in your mouth, right? That's the Raisin experience meditation. It's kind of the first teaching of a certain kind of Vipassana. And they're trying to get you to understand, you were calling that a raisin, but there's this whole other thing you can do with it, right? And back when there used to be humanities in the school and stuff, that's what they were trying to teach you. That your senses were interesting, music was interesting, language was beautiful, stuff like that. So that's what most Vipassana is trying to get you to do. And of course, in this class, we'll be talking about that. However, I'm going to make good on my word and talk about not only the fact that the concept level is super important for life in terms of us, just doing anything at all and understanding what we're doing and having a job and stuff. But you can do great meditation on the conceptual level. Anybody know of any?
Essentially studying Madhyamika.
You could study Madhyamika philosophy, and there is a way to do that as a meditation. Even more simply, you could do analytical meditation, which would use Madhyamika philosophy, right? So analytical meditation, I'm not going to write that on the board, but we'll do that in a minute. Any kind of, let's see, if I was to say, let's talk about where anything came from. We're going to do a meditation on where anything came from. We'll do that in a minute. That will be an analytical meditation. So I'll just set that aside and say, I'll guide that in a minute. Another one would be, a really typical one would be dependent co-arising meditation. So anything that's happening as the apple, noticing how that's dependently co-arising or thinking about that. Another really common Vipassana one would just be thinking about how other people are suffering and how you might relieve that suffering. You know, that's like an analytical meditation that is totally on the level of concepts. A really common one in American society that's super useful is the stuff you do in cognitive behavioral therapy. That entire therapy is like one long analytical meditation. So, for example, you're going to look at your thinking and notice cognitive distortion. In other words, conceptual distortion. So, if all your thinking is black and white, and you keep noticing you're saying, I, I, I always screw up, and I'm never good. You're going to, in cognitive behavioral, you're going to go, well, is that true, really? Always, every single time? You've never even like gone to the bathroom right? Well, okay, I sometimes do things wrong, and I sometimes, get it right, actually. And are you all, so you go in there and every single thought you have, especially the looping thoughts, the negative looping thoughts, you do analytical meditation on them. And that turns out to be incredibly powerful for fixing stuff that's wrong with your mind. Like those cognitive distortions are very disturbing, and the reason they're called distortions is they are incorrect, usually because they're too extreme. Right? So that's another example of a conceptual meditation that is actually incredibly powerful and useful. Everybody understand what I'm saying? Okay, now we'll do one. This will not be a long meditation. Gnome. Usually these kind of conceptual meditations in Buddhist history are done to help you learn and deeply understand and kind of soak in and steep in Buddhist philosophy, right? The one we'll be doing tonight is slightly less classic than that, but you'll get the idea. And it's powerful, actually. So this meditation has one simple question. And that is, let's ring the bell. So the question you ask yourself in this meditation is, where did I come from? Okay? And so you can go and do that on your own, but I'll guide it mildly and just say, well, there's the obvious immediate answer, which is most people had parents of some sort. And so we can say you came from your parents. There was probably a father and a mother, and those people combined to make you. At least the beginning of you, but then there's all the food you've eaten since then. Like, is there really any atoms in you that were there when you were born? Who knows? So it could be all the food you've eaten since then, all the air you've breathed. And the structure of your brain would even include all the stuff you've ever learned. And learning, including just, talking to people, watching movies, all that is included in the structure of your brain. So all that is part of where you came from. And then in a conventional sense, we would talk about like where you grew up, or the place or many places where, the little person slowly grew to become a larger person. And so the culture and attitudes and other people you were around and accidents and events and maybe illnesses and diseases and sunshine, or if you're like me, frigid snowscape or whatever that was part of your upbringing, is all part of where you came from and part of what and who you are now. So notice that's a pretty broad and ubiquitous kind of field of things that you're arising out of. But to really go there, you then have to say, well, where did those things come from? Where did your parents come from? And of course, the easy answer is, well, my grandparents, their parents. But then you have to include all the same stuff, like the food they ate, the place they were, the places they grew up, the situations they grew up in, the things they learned, the ways their genes might have been influenced by cosmic rays, all that. So you have to include all that stuff and where all that came from. And then if we really start thinking about, where your grandparents came from and we kind of take a bigger view, it's like, well, actually they came from primate ancestors. And eventually we can trace that back to like tree shrews, little kind of like possum-like things that arose after the Big Bang, or after the comet that killed the dinosaurs, the meteor that killed the dinosaurs. But speaking of dinosaurs, that's where your family came from too. That's where your parents came from also. And eventually we work our way back to very basic forms of eukaryotes, and then we make the big step back into even prokaryotes, like single-celled organisms. And as we know, the atoms for the primordial soup that gives rise to single-celled organisms come from stars, because they're heavier atoms that are just found floating around in the early universe, and so they have to be manufactured in the hearts of stars. So your family came from stars, literally. You come from a star, literally. But where do stars come from? Well, the best we can say is the Big Bang. And then no one knows before that. So it just sort of ends up at a question mark. But notice that the easy answer, well, I came from Michigan, or I came from my parents, that's like a really, that's like metatag world, like the simplest possible concept. But even on this conceptual level, if we start digging in, things get very complex and rich and deep very, very quickly. And this is it just going in one direction. I'm using kind of a Western materialist scientific direction to talk about it, just because we're probably all pretty familiar with that. But we could analyze where we came from, as a dependent co-arising expression in the moment. We could do a lot of different ways of chopping this up. But notice that no matter what you're experiencing this loud shirt, you're experiencing, the temperature in the room, you're experiencing an apple, you're experiencing a thought in your mind, whatever, to really understand where that came from, you have to go back to the Big Bang over and over again. As Carl Sagan used to say, to tell someone how to bake an apple pie, you have to go back to the Big Bang, if you're really going to be as clear as you can be. So just think about all those beings, billions upon billions upon billions of beings, all that nutrient, the food, the air. Think about the land, the different, like even the place that you grew up, that the fact that before that was a city, that was a, let's say, a field or something. Before it was a field, it might have been rocks underground, etc., etc. Everything has been so many other things for so many billions of years that are conventional labels, like this is me now in this place at this time. It's all just a kind of shorthand that really obscures this ultra deep history and hyper complexity of interconnectedness that is actually going on. So just sit with that for a moment and really kind of imagine it and feel into it. Good. So that was an analytical meditation. And even though that was kind of a modern science-ish meditation, analytical style meditation is as old as Buddhism itself. It's something that is very, very traditional. It's not often taught in meditation centers. But if you were, let's say, a Buddhist monastic, a monk or a nun or whatever, this would be very traditional, to do more Buddhist philosophical type analytical meditations or whatever. So never think that this conceptual level somehow is a lesser than. It's we're trying to move down the stack for a certain reason, but doing meditation at the conceptual level, getting good at it, is actually incredibly powerful and useful, and it's wonderful for having a clear, bright mind, right? And it can also help you work with certain aspects of your meditation practice. I'm always angry, and let's say you understand that you need to accept and even love your anger and so on, and at the same time you want to express that in a negative way less, so you start thinking about how anger causes harm, and think about, lists in Buddhism of the negative aspects of anger. I mean, you can go into a whole way of meditating on an emotion to kind of have a better conceptual understanding of why that might not be skillful for you to express in certain ways, and why it might be skillful to express in other ways or whatever. So, very traditional and super powerful, and again, something we don't do enough of. It'd be fun to do a lot of those, actually. The closest we get at SFDC is Michael Owen's class, right? It's really going in that direction when we go into some of these sutra discussions. So that's awesome. I'm going to take a drink of water. So before we go into level 2, see, on the first night you're already going to level 2. Are there any questions? No. I'm going to have to repeat your question, so try to make it pithy.
I'm wondering if Brahma-Viharat practice can fall under conceptual.
Yeah. So can Brahma-Vihara practice, or what we usually call metta meditation, loving kindness meditation, fall under conceptual practice? Absolutely. In fact, the way I was talking about working with emotions, we could just think about what's good about compassion and then start doing a full analysis of that or something. And that would be really traditional. So it's not literally Brahmavihara practice, right? When you do it that way. But, especially if you're sitting there thinking through some of the parts of Brahmavihara, it partakes a bit of conceptual. That's something, thank you for reminding me, it's something I want to say is none of these levels are absolute. Meaning they're not, I was going to say binary, but what's the word I'm looking for? They're not discrete. Yeah, they're continuous. Thank you. We're going to get, richer and richer into concept and, begin to partake of the phenomenological more and more, right? And gradually it gets more and more phenomenological. So part of Brahmavihara as a concept could be picturing something and, saying words about it. But then eventually you're getting this good feeling and that's pretty phenomenological. So, it crosses a boundary there. And so something to always remember is that probably nothing is purely any of these. We're just talking about kind of where a practice sort of is probably centered. What else? Yes.
Seems pretty similar to contemplation.
You mean the conceptual meditation seems similar to contemplation?
Yeah. Okay. Are there any differences between those? Anything that
What do you mean when you say contemplation, and what tradition are you coming from when you ask that?
I'm really not experienced enough to answer that, but when I say contemplation, I guess what I'm talking about is, I don't know, like analyzing something or like thinking about a idea.
Yes. So the interesting thing about is this like contemplation, I'll just get a little nerdy about language, like, this meditation language that we use comes from Latin, right? And like church Latin. And of course, Christianity previous to the Protestant Revolution had a tremendous amount of meditation in it. And a very, 1 out of 8 Europeans at that time was a monastic. 1 out of every 8 people. So there were a lot of monastics. There's a lot of nunneries and monasteries and abbeys and stuff all across Europe. And so there's a super developed tradition of meditation. But what's funny is we've got it exactly backwards in terms of the language. If you're using not liturgical, but if you're using like kind of a theological Latin, the word for sitting there thinking about something is called meditation, meditazione, or however you say it in Latin. And doing like a wordless feeling of your body or whatever, that's contemplation. And so they got it backwards when they started applying it to Asian traditions. And it's just a mistake. So there's a funny thing in there to always remember that if you're looking at, meditation thing for like San Juan de la Cruz or, Teresa of Avila or something, when they talk about meditation, they're talking about analytical work. And when they're talking about contemplation, they're talking about, wordless feeling of the heart or something. It's just interesting. But yes, it would be, there's a thing called Lectio Divina, right? In Latin. Anyone care to translate that? But what do?
Well, you read the scripture.
You read the scripture as a meditation, right? And you're like, I remember working with someone one time who was teaching me Lectio Divina, and it's like you read this passage about, let's say, the Passion of Christ, and then you have to picture it very completely. And in fact, you might spend weeks picturing that one scene. Oh, then they put the sponge of vinegar on his, parched lips, and you're like spending like a week picturing that and imagining it and like kind of embodying that experience. So that's Lectio Divina, and that would be an example of that, right? So it's like this is a very common thing worldwide, and it's also, of course, really where academics is supposed to go. Like if you're if if you're really involved in your math, you would be doing a kind of Lectio Divina with your theorems or whatever. So powerful stuff, and yes, I would say that we could distinguish it from the meditation version, depending on how much music you have on in the background, how much distraction is going on, because to do it like kind of properly, you'd want to shut everything else off and just focus, right? Anything else? No, another question there? No? Okay. All right. Take a break real fast, just for people who have to go to the restroom. Do it, and then we'll start level 2. I'll ring the bell in like 3 minutes, so don't. We good to go there, Antonio? Time out, okay. I am speaking in order to let everyone know what my voice sounds like and to test the levels of that voice in this sound system. How's that? It's always both. So we've got an audio issue. It is on, yes. Good? All right. Can we go? All right. Let's say you just sat down at an amazing meal. Someone had spent all day cooking it. Maybe you looked up these special recipes, you invited your best friends, it's like this beautiful day, everything is just exquisitely rich and gorgeous, and your friends sit down and they're like, let's get this over with as fast as possible. Or same, let's say, you're about to have an intimate experience with another person and they're like, yeah, can we make this as quick as possible? It's just, it's not the richest kind of experience. And what drives me crazy about a map like this is people are like, how do I get to 4 as fast as possible? And it's the same thing. I'm like, I get it, but it's just the wrong attitude. Like, to stop that. Let's be where we're at and be with it and enjoy it and imbibe that and really be present. That's what it's about. The whole trying to be fast thing and efficient is just not really part of the game. And we're modern Westerners, filled with the disease of capitalism, and so we can't help but think that way. But it's like, and I think that way too, right? That's just our culture. But coming out of that as much as possible and trying to be with where you're at is what this is about, right? So that said, we're going to rush to level 2. And remember, next week we'll do more level 2. So level 2 is phenomenological level, which is a fancy way of saying enjoying your senses, noticing the sensory details rather than the idea of it. So instead of stamping it apple, it's all the stuff I keep saying about an apple. Instead of just saying, that was music, it's like letting that concerto just, ravish your ears, right? It's so rich, there's so much to notice about that. And just to be fair, you could do the same thing conceptually. You could get into the concept of the Bach music, which is extremely complicated, really. I mean, that particular piece is known for its simplicity, but there's like a 25-minute video online that just deconstructs how totally complex it is and how fascinating that is. So it's not like the conceptual level isn't rich. It's just rich in another way. And it's rich sort of like horizontally on that map. And we're going vertically. Okay? So if you go to a lot of meditation centers, they'll teach you the first day that Raisin Meditation I keep teasing them about. So you're going to take that raisin, you'll look at it, you'll smell it, and then you put it in your mouth and you try to chew it as slowly as possible because there's a lot of taste going on. It tastes sugary and it kind of feels rubbery, but also your saliva there's a lot happening there. And they're trying to get you out of the conceptual and into the phenomenological, right? What's it like as an experience? Can you notice your senses? And again, in our culture, in our time, we're very impoverished that way, even though we have more sensory stimulating stuff than ever before. It's like we kind of lost the whole idea of something being beautiful or something being rich in that way, and we just go straight to the concept, about it. What do we think about it politically? What do we think about it economically and all that? Which, again, all has its value and its place. But we've kind of lost touch with the directness of our own senses and the richness of sensory experience. And that's what initially meditation is trying to get you to do. And so when people say, meditate on your breath, and the first day you're doing, maybe you just got done with the Raisin Meditation, it's your first day of meditation, you got taught that, you did the Raisin Meditation, now you're going to meditate on your breath. And so usually it's spoken about like that, meditate on your breath. And that's already a concept, right? What's the breath? But okay, I'm going to meditate on my breath. And if you're really used to the conceptual and you're trying to touch the phenomenological, you at least notice your breathing in and breathing out in the most general way. But if the instructor's trying to really help you get phenomenological, they're going to, instead of saying the breath, they're going to say, I want you to contact the body sensations of breathing. Because already that's a little clearer, like how it feels in your body to breathe. And then they're going to give you hints like feel your belly rising and falling. Feel like your nostrils tingling as the air rushes in and rushes out. Feel your chest expanding and contracting. You can actually, depending on your sensitivity, maybe even feel your lungs. And then as they get a little more into it, they'll start saying stuff like, can you notice that the breath is cold, the air of breathing is cold going in and warmer coming out, because your lungs have, your lifeblood has actually warmed the air, and when you shove it back out your nose, you feel that warmth, right? So they start to give you instructions that are already more phenomenologically oriented, right? Like get into the feeling. And that's the name of the game. And we can do it, remember, what's a valid sensory experience for Vipassana? Anything. So we can do it on any experience in any sense gate. If we do it on a sound, you're listening to the easiest way to put it is the sound of the sound. It's not the content of the sound. It's the richness of the tones and the way it, lands in your ear, and it's sharp or it's round or it's real staccato or it's smooth, all those kinds of things. And I'm saying it in words to describe it to you now, but of course you wouldn't be thinking about it like that. You're just getting into the sound of the sound. And the way that like a brass gong, a brass gong sounds is different from, let's say, like an oboe, right? The quality of that sound is so different. And then like a car crash outside versus, like a songbird and so on. They're very, very different types of phenomena, and the goal is to get more and more into that. And so kind of like day one for most meditation, they're trying to get you to make that move at least a little bit. But because of the way we're trained to stay up in the concept pretty much all the time, except for certain careers or certain hobbies. We're kind of used to thinking about it instead of experiencing it. So usually the attempt will be made to anchor you in the phenomena a little bit, like at least count your breath, right? And when you think about it, that could be noting. Counting your breath is a kind of noting, and Vipassana practice, even all the way down to 4, is noting. Alex was asking me about isn't noting conceptual? Well, sure, but what's interesting is it's a conceptual practice that you can take all the way down to level 4, just because it's not like the noting contains a big concept. It's just about anchoring your attention, right? And there's ways of doing noting practice that aren't verbal, like you can do finger noting. Just tap your finger every time you note something. Is that conceptual? It's doing the same thing. And even if it is, as I said, every level contains the other levels at least a little bit. These aren't discrete categories that absolutely exclude the other categories. So noting is an example of a little tiny bit of concept that comes with you all the way, even though I would claim it's not even that much of a concept. But again, breath counting or whatever, it's just trying to get your most basic level of attention on the phenomena. But what's the the real way to get your concentration on a phenomena, like the powerful way, the way that really is going to help you get deeply into the phenomena? Anybody? Investigation, that's the name of the game in Vipassana, but what are we investigating? The phenomena, the qualities of the phenomena. So it's an interesting paradox, but like if you want to get involved in something, it's really hard to get involved with a label. Labels are boring. Apple, apple, I'm done, right? That's not going to change. I can stay attending to the word apple, and that's its own kind of meditation, but that's a shamatha meditation. That's not on this map, right? That's just focusing on something to focus. Instead, if you want to start really getting into phenomena, you do it by noticing details of the phenomena. So I gave an example of details in the breathing, right? If you're doing any body sensation, let's see if I can do the basic list. It would be felt location, felt size, felt three-dimensional shape, and then just put felt in front of everything. Temperature, pressure, density, texture, solidity, all those sorts of things about any sensation in your body, right? And it's not like you're sitting there trying to think about that as a list of words or using your thesaurus to find the best description for this particular texture. So the example I always give, so pardon me if you've heard this example before, but for investigating the phenomena of a body sensation, imagine that I gave you a piece of carpet, like a foot square piece of carpet, but actually rough. It's not a square, it's some irregular shape, and it's a shag carpet. Or let's say shag rug, but it's just a swatch, right? An irregular swatch, but imagine really long. But then I've taken scissors, pinking shears, and randomly cut some of it to different lengths. And then I put some Elmer's glue in there and maybe some honey and also some sand and some like very small pieces of broken windshield and maybe some wire. And then you close your eyes and you didn't have any of that description. And I put that in front of you and I say, put your hands in that and feel it. So right now, just imagine doing that. And what that exploration would be like tactily. Some of it. Right? Maybe there's some seashells in there. Maybe there's there could be like some corkscrew pasta, So there's a lot of textures in there. And that's the beginning of how you get interested in a sensation. Because sensations we're used to devaluing them, especially body sensations, and just being like, yeah, that's my leg, so what? Gets me around to the next, thing I got to do fast. But instead, it's just the opposite. We're going to get curious. Oh, there's the sensation in that one part of my thigh. And I'm going to just feel it like I just had you imagine feeling that carpet. But in that sensation over and over and over again at the highest level of resolution possible. Right? The highest level of detail you can get. So let's do that right now. Yes?
So when we're doing it, so we're labeling,
Not labeling anything. If you're
just like we're just feeling it,
that's it.
conceptualizing that that's itchy or that's
None of that. You just feel it. Because otherwise you're back up in the conceptual meditation. That would still be a worthwhile meditation, but then you're in Wordville. Instead, you're just imagine feeling that carpet, all the different things you would feel. Yes?
So I guess like inside conceptual, you can have like leg down to itchy or warm leg or something. You get like a bit more specific, but it's still a concept. So once you let go of that, you're kind of more in that phenomenon space.
Yeah. Okay, so we will note this. We're going to do a body sensation. I want you to pick one body sensation. I encourage you to pick something kind of complex, like let's say your right hip joint, or maybe your trachea or something where there's a lot of different weird shapes of the sensation going on and whatever. But you can pick anything you want. Let's go. And just begin feeling into that. And at first, especially if you're not feeling particularly concentrated, you just contact the sensation very generally. And we'll use one label, and the label will be body sensation, or you can shorten it to just body. Okay, that's it. It's just enough to keep you on the sensation as a focus object. And again, at first, that's enough. That's the beginning of the phenomenological. But then your job is to heighten your sensory clarity and begin to explore that sensation in detail. And all of us come with a gigantic cultural baggage that says this is a stupid thing to do. Why would I feel, the itchiness in my knee for an hour? No one's going to pay me to do that. So this is stupid and useless. And furthermore, uninteresting. Itchy knee, that's it. That's all there is to say about it. So we have to kind of break through that membrane. And the way we break through the membrane is to begin to explore the sensation. Remember, this is feeling. First, feel the location of it. Where does it feel like it is? And then feel the size of the sensation. This is a felt size. You're not sitting there conceptualizing how big it really is in quotes or how big it has to be based on the size of bodies or whatever. That's not interesting at all, unless you're up at the conceptual level. What we're doing here is feeling how big it feels. And for the record, in a long meditation retreat, sometimes your body feels like it's 100 miles wide or something. It's very common, actually. So you're just feeling how big it feels. And then you can feel the three-dimensional shape. Hint, it turns out bodies are three-dimensional, so body sensations are three-dimensional. We tend to conceptualize them as very flat. But again, that's up in concept land. When you feel a sensation, it's 3D. For the most part. Especially if you're getting down into the meat, you're not just staying on the surface of the skin. If you're at any depth in the body, the sensation is three-dimensional. And that shape can be very irregular and complex and interesting to explore with the feelings. And you'll notice you're probably making a mental image of it. That's normal. But that's a side effect. That's fine that that's there, but what you're doing is feeling. And you're feeling with great detail. So we did the location, we did the size, we did the shape. You can sit there and feel the shape for a long time. And then try feeling the texture of it, particularly remembering that it's 3D, so the texture is different at different points. As if you had a bowl of oatmeal and there was raisins and walnuts in it, and maybe some honey and cream and sugar. The texture is going to be really different at different points in that bowl. And so same thing, as you feel into this body sensation, notice that it has a lot of different textures. And you may also notice that as part of that, or a similar thing, is that it has different densities. And again, this is the feeling of density. We're not talking about anything that we don't care about someone going in there and measuring the density or something. It's how it feels. And so you'll notice that some sensations, the whole thing just feels like a bowling ball or something. It's just heavy and solid throughout, with kind of an even texture. But a lot of them aren't like that. A lot of sensations, maybe one end of it is heavy and sharp and pointy and very dense. And then it's kind of long, and as you get towards the other end of it, it gets really diffuse and almost like kind of like a gas or something. It's very, very wispy. So I'm going to leave you, these are just hints about how to do this, but I'm going to leave you to explore now for about 5 minutes, just feeling this one sensation. If you get bored, you fail. So go back and get interested in it again and look at more details. Good. So that's how you do that. Of course, next week we're going to talk about that a lot more. There's way more to say about that. But, you know, most Vipassana meditators are somewhere in there, because that level 2 is very wide. There's a big variance from the beginning of that, where you first notice any sensation a little bit for a little while, all the way down to where it starts to get, each moment is a vast panoply of super rich, ultra complicated, and really deep sensation. But notice that that's how you get interested in something, right? That's how it's fascinating enough to grab all of your attention, as you're getting into the details. And then the more you attend to it, the more details you can see. And then the more you attend to it, the more details you can see. This level 2 is very much like just increasing the resolution on your TV over and over, or your video player over and over and over, right? To just keep, eventually it's at HD, and then super HD, and then super double secret HD, it just keeps getting more and more vivid and rich and complex. But it's when we think of things as labels, and the labels are dismissive, like the label serves to not think about it, that's when meditation is impossible, right? That makes it really, really hard. If I'm using the label body sensation so I don't think about that, and I can just kind of dismiss it, that's it. I'm just dismissing. And you'll notice as you walk around, people talk in a certain way that is intended to dismiss most things, except this one narrow thing that they want to discuss right now. And again, that's in the name of efficiency. But in meditation, if you, in general, are working to get more into your breath sensation, or doing a body scan type thing, this is the path. You want to really turn up the dial on the sensory clarity, get into the richness of the experience as deep as you possibly can, and then nerd out on that hour after hour after hour. Like that's what you do in a long retreat, right? You're just exploring the sensations as richly, as complexly as possible. Your body, your brain will help you do this, right? So if you're a piano player, the part of your brain that is responsible for controlling your hands gets fatter, much, much bigger, so that there's a lot more neurons for controlling your hands. If you have to memorize a bunch of super complex physical locations, your hippocampus gets really large, because that's what's required in order to memorize spatial locations. And so it physically gets bigger. Your brain's just putting neurons on that task. In the case of body sensation, or really all sensation, you have a pair of things in your brain called insular cortices. Those get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And in fact, you can predict how long someone's been doing mindfulness meditation based on how fat their insular cortices are. So it takes a while. You're actually physically building a part of your brain, All learning is just that, but if you do this a lot, the resolution starts getting much bigger. And it's not just because you're paying better attention, it's because you actually have a lot more neurons dedicated to the task, and so they're just getting more information, and so it starts to get hyper rich. Okay, so I notice it is now 9 o'clock, and that's our ending time. So I'll just say, if you gotta go, feel free to leave. Otherwise, questions?
Was that kind of what Daniel Ingram was describing, just the details?
Yes. Was the question is, was that what Daniel Ingram's describing? Daniel Ingram is teaching Vipassana meditation. So yes, although I will say I tend to describe it spatially, like I'm saying, smaller and smaller bits of the, and Daniel tends to describe it temporally, like he'll say faster and faster, you know, and Daniel's just kind of a fast guy anyway. Right? He's really, so we just talk about it differently, but it's the same idea exactly, especially because our teachers were best friends, and so there's deep background of why we might talk about it in a very similar but slightly different way. Yes, what else? Anything? Noe.
What's that? Falling into that phenomenon or the body and examining it, staying with it was difficult for me today. But once it seemed like, well, there it is. I stay, because you stay there. But thank you for doing that. It's like it is something I put in the background. I do dismiss it.
Yeah, that's so. No, he's asking about dismissing the phenomena or describing dismissing the phenomena. That's our habit. That's just what our culture's like. You know, what's important? Stuff like your taxes. You got to really get in there with the details. But, you know, it turns out that that's not that great for life. What's great for life is getting in the details of your sensory experience, right? So maybe we should stop questions for a moment and do SFDC announcements before everybody goes. So are you doing that, or who is doing that this evening? Brendan, would you like to come up and do announcements?
Thank you for that. That was good. Welcome to the San Francisco Dharma Collective. We are all volunteers running this place, and so any generosity that you show us goes to either Michael or, you know, keeping this place going. So we appreciate that, and we survive on the small donations. So if you can give, that'd be great. And we never turn away anyone for not having funds to donate. And as far as upcoming events, no, can you help me?
Well, there's two things that aren't yet on any flyers, but will have been in today's newsletter and are on our website. And one is a mini retreat on the 22nd with Potato Valley and Jordana Dweck.
So this is a mini retreat on the when?
On the 22nd, February 22nd.
So February 22nd, there's a mini retreat.
And it's going to be pretty awesome. And then on the 29th, there's another retreat with Les White and Vicky Chang, and it's also going to be awesome.
Another retreat
So
on the
just
29th. So go to
everything
the
else there-
SFDC website.
Flyers up there for it, so come check out what's happening. There's a women's series that's at its second meeting, and also a couple of weekends.
Also-
23rd, I think.
Thank you. Also, just for people who are watching this on the streaming feed, please donate. You can do it for the SFDC, PayPal, Venmo, etc. So if you're finding this interesting, useful, helpful, or you just feel generous tonight, please give to SFDC. Okay. That's it for announcements.
Self-servingly, I'm a volunteer committee with Julian, and we have a volunteer appreciation night on Friday, February 21st. It's a movie called Samsara. It's going to be great. Eric is showing it and helping to spearhead that. If you are a volunteer, you're welcome to come. If you have ever thought about volunteering anywhere in the world, you are also welcome to come. But I will press you into helping out with volunteers here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So thanks for coming. Next week, we'll go into level 2 much more deeply, and then we'll begin the very terrifying transition into level 3. That's where everyone gets in trouble. So next week, level 2 and level 3. Mainly level 2. All right? Thank you. It's phenomenal.
It's so